All right, got a solo episode for you here on a Friday. Going to break down why the Nets are winning on their defense this season. Not an offensive team. Don't think of the Nets as an offensive team. Think of them as an offensive team, but think of them as an elite defensive team as well. We'll take a look at some of the numbers the Nets have been putting up this season on the defensive end. Take a little bit of a look at the Pelicans game as well coming up here on Friday. Got a packed podcast for you. We're going to get into it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. This episode of Locked On Nets brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's an official community center. A big thank you to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. I'm Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR.com. If you need some projections for FanDuel and or DraftKings, head on over to DFSR.com. Got you covered for all 240 minutes of a basketball game for every single team over there. No Adam Armbrecht today. That's all right. He was covering the game last night. Big win, or excuse me, 2 nights ago. Big win over the Magic. A game that the Nets really probably needed in terms of blowout. It's important for the Nets to blow out teams at times, especially teams that are not good, like the Magic, because it gives them a chance to just rest. It's sort of in-game rest, especially after, this season is still pretty constricted in terms of schedule. They're piling a lot of games in. They'd come off 4 games in 5 days. You do get a little bit of a schedule win by being able to play a really weak Magic team. So it was nice to have covered that win, get the starters out of the game early, and sort of away you go. And it's important in the NBA to get games like that, especially on a team like the Nets, who are a little long in the tooth, I think we would say. Their average, I was looking up the other day, their average experience around the team, that's like by years in the league. It was a little harder for me to filter by just specific age and birth date, but their average, they're the second most average experience, which is probably just a proxy for age, right? There was like 5.5 years was the average. Lakers were killing everybody in that department, killing in quotes, by the way, with seven plus years in terms of service in the NBA. But when we look at the Nets so far this season, they're 8-4. Their expected win percentage is probably a little bit lower, just in terms of based on opponent and then overall point differential. But 8-4 is probably, you'd take that before the season started. Say to yourself, where are we with the team right now? We're 8-4 to start the season through the first 12 games. I think you'd feel pretty good about that number. I think you could make a case they could be 9-3, but you don't want to slice it too thin. But what I wanted to talk about today was why the Nets are winning. And then it's obvious to say, okay, the Nets are winning because Kevin Durant is playing at MVP level. He has been about as good a player in the NBA that you can have this season. The stats are the best of his career, and right now I think he's behind only Steph Curry in terms of MVP odds going into Friday's game. Curry sits above him at betonline.ag, and then it's Durant. And I think that probably makes sense based on the records of the teams. But why the Nets are winning is, one, Kevin Durant playing at MVP level. But 2, the fact that their defense has just been great. There's really kind of not another way to put it. For a team that has Kevin Durant and James Harden on it, you would think, okay, this is a team that's getting by on its offensive firepower. They're just going to outscore you. That's basically what they did last year when it came to the trio of Durant, Harden, and Irving when they were actually playing together. Was it was just a continued onslaught of offensive firepower. You would live with some of the defensive aspects of it, although they had usually 2 good defenders behind those guys. But it was mostly that you're just not going to be able to outscore this team. You will, if you are in the half court with them, or if you're even playing in transition with them, if you have those 3 guys in your team, just good luck outscoring them. You can trade baskets all day long till infinity, and the Nets are going to win, 9 times out of, I mean, that's too high, but they're going to win far and away higher percentage games that they're going to lose. This season, no Kyrie, Kevin Durant playing at MVP levels, but it's really been the defense that has gotten the Nets by so far. The numbers for them have continued to get better with each passing game. We talked about it on a previous episode, but the insertion of Bruce Brown into the starting lineup has kind of, it took Nash and company too long to figure this out, probably, or 2 or 3 games too long to figure out, hey, he should be starting like he was last year. But right now, this is going into Friday's game against the Pelicans. The Nets are 4th overall in defensive efficiency on the season. Golden State's above them, Clippers, Denver, Brooklyn. 100.5 per 100 possessions on the defensive efficiency scale. Now, have they played the most robust set of offensive talent in the league so far? No, but they've played enough that we're rounding into fashion here on having played enough teams to say the defensive scheme is working. Putting Bruce Brown in the starting lineup was an absolute necessity. Again, it took them 2 games too long to figure it out, but getting him into the game into that starting lineup with the rest of that group of Durant, Harden, Harris, and then Blake Griffin on the back line, this is all of a sudden it adds a defensive disruptor to their team. He can guard other teams' primary ball handlers, which they desperately need when you are playing with James Harden. But their scheme has sort of changed a little bit too. Matt Brooks from Nets Daily did a great job of breaking this down on a recent video where he talks about, and it's obvious if you were watching the games, where they've changed the defensive scheme to have more drop coverage when it comes to Blake Griffin, and they're afforded to be able to do that because Bruce Brown is so good. So when you think about this Brooklyn team, it's obvious that you're going to come into it first and say, okay, hey, you have Kevin Durant, you're going to win with offense. You have James Harden, you're going to win with offense. But what we're seeing here from this Brooklyn team, and by the way, this is how championship teams are sort of born, is that when you have a great defensive team, you become like a team to be reckoned with. And the team last year was good at defense also. Like they were able to, I mentioned before how they were able to outscore opponents just with stunning regularity. But it was also because they had a good scheme. They had really good switching defenders, guys like Jeff Green on the court that could switch. They could guard at least 3 positions. They gave you a lot of flexibility on the defensive end, took a little bit of the load off Durant when need be. And that really ended up working well. They lose Jeff Green, so that's a problem. They haven't really functionally replaced him with a switching big, but they've been able to sort of figure it out with these guys like Bruce Brown and then, to some extent, DeAndre Bembry, who's playing. And it's really given them a defensive identity that you've been able to see kind of taking shape over the last couple games. Their defense with that group, the starting lineup group, of who they've been starting now. I've mentioned it before, KD, Harden, Harris, Bruce Brown, and Blake Griffin. Per their play-by-play stats on pbpstats.com, that group has played 144 minutes together so far. They have a net rating of 7.32, which is amazing. The offensive rating is awesome, 105.33, so they are scoring. And the defensive rating is 98.01. These are just completely elite numbers. It drops off a little bit when you get some of the reserves coming in. That's usually to be expected from really anybody, especially the drop-off you're going to get replacing either of the 2 superstars. Like, it's totally reasonable to have those numbers dip a little bit. But what we're seeing with that group is this is an elite starting group that is giving other teams real problems on both ends. You saw it with Orlando, where Orlando's a bad team. They're super young, and they're not going to be able to navigate some of the just sort of the firepower, especially offensively, from the Nets. And then they're not really kind of smart enough or in tune enough to now deal with what the Nets were doing defensively either. And this is where you get an absolute blowout where the Nets win by 33 points. Because when you play bad teams, when you're starting to get it locked in on both sides of the court or both ends of the court, it's going to be really, really difficult for a team that, at their average experience is probably the youngest in the league. I should have looked that up before I got in here. I can look this up real quick. They're 5th youngest or whatever by experience, 2.6 average years per guy. And Gary Harris and Terrence Ross are really throwing that number off a little bit for guys that play sort of bench minutes. But you get a 33-point victory because you're able to now become more of a complete team, do it on both ends of the court, and all of a sudden, this is what you sort of end up rolling downhill, and you can get guys out in the 4th quarter. So I do think the defensive piece for the Nets is sort of being overlooked. And it makes sense because when you have Kevin Durant, you're not going to think about that as a defensive team, even though he's an excellent defender. But, James Harden and Kevin Durant are going to think, okay, we're just blitzing you on offense. But, man, it's really not been the case. And this is sort of how championship-level teams begin to be born. So I want to get a little bit more into the defensive stuff, get a little bit more into what we're seeing from some of these other lineup combinations as well. Talk a little bit about the age piece, too, because I think that's going to be important as we roll through the rest of the season. You have to know, like we said at the top, this episode of Locked On Nets is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. You know these guys, the Golden Arches, baby. McDonald's has been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's where family and friends can go to reconnect. I've been a big proponent of the coffee. You stop in there on the road trip. You get some free Wi-Fi going. The McDonald's really just has it all. Win or lose, is a place where teammates, competitors, and home team, away team can come for a recharge. Head on over to your local McDonald's, refuel, and reconnect. Locked On Nets is here to tell you that we are loving it. Also, got to talk to you about our friends over at betonline.ag. Mentioned them at the top of the show in terms of MVP odds. Betonline.ag really has everything you can need when you're looking to get some action in on either of those future bets, like MVP stuff for when it comes to Kevin Durant. Nets championship odds, runaway favorites on betonline.ag at plus 275. Next closest, the Lakers. Don't have any idea. That number's got to drop. BetOnline, get it together. Lakers, have you seen these guys play? How can they be second overall in championship odds right now? Might not even make the playoffs, but it's all available for you on betonline.ag. They reworked the interface. It's super slick, easy to use. Everything you can imagine is up there. Basketball, like we said, football, NHL, boxing, UFC fights, even some Vegas casino games. Take advantage of all the amazing offers that are over on betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. So if we establish the idea that the Nets are a defensive I don't want to call them a defensive first team because that's not really totally accurate. They are obviously awesome on offense too. They actually rank better on defense compared to the league than they do on offense. So right now they're actually the 14th ranked offense at 105.5. Some somewhat surprising teams at the top of the offensive efficiency. Some of this has to do with opponent so far, so this is not filtered out by strength of schedule. Philly actually the overall offense in the league, and that's with Embiid missing some time. So that's Seth Curry kind of shooting the lights out. But Embiid and Tobias Harris have missed tons of time. That's the number one ranked offense. Go figure that. Golden State makes sense. Utah 3. Okay, that's a team that's kind of has their identity kind of set. It's going to be a little easy. It's going to be somewhat easier for teams like that to have an offensive identity early. New York 4. Not totally shocked by that based on some of the moves they made. And then, like I said, the Nets rank all the way down at 14th, so more middle of the pack. And they're tied at 14th, so you can really actually just put them right in the middle of the league on offense. And it's surprising when you think of the Nets that way because, again, this is a team that has two of the most high-powered offensive players in basketball on their team, and they're getting huge contributions from a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge off the bench, who's been just shooting the absolute lights out for the better part of the season so far. Patty Mills came out hot, has dropped off a little bit. But overall, if you think that the Nets are not actually totally together on the offensive end, or there's room for growth, and you think the defense is establishing itself as a pretty strong group, and I get that I'm cherry picking a little bit because I'm saying, okay, well, one thing is going to stay and the other thing has room for growth. That, whatever you want to say about that. But this is a situation where if we even think that the Nets, if James Harden's game is going to continue to improve, right? If they're going to get just more of their timing set down, which has become a problem early in the season where the timing on offense hasn't totally been there. Where some of the shots for like Joe Harris was shooting sort of, underneath his career averages to start the season. If some of these very basic things are going to begin to regress for the Nets in a positive way, then we're really starting to look again at this championship caliber team that you have, and to be a championship caliber team, you have to be elite at one thing and you need to be like average or, way better than average at the other thing. Right? You don't need to be an elite offense, but you need to be a very good offense and then maybe elite on defense or vice versa. So you can't be great on offense and absolutely horrendous on defense because that's that's not a winning formula, right? You can't get by, especially with the rigors of the postseason and teams being able to dial in on your greatest weakness. If you have a great weakness, like let's say the defense in this scenario, or the offense maybe, that's going to end up becoming problematic, more and more problematic as the season goes on into the playoffs. But the Nets are starting to establish that that's probably not going to be the case. And so when you're able to bring in guys like Bruce Brown and DeAndre Bembry to be these disruptors, to kind of change your scheme a little bit, to make it really hard and take away things that other teams want to do, like that, if you're going to be able to take away primary ball handling from elite, guards or wings with these two guys, you can begin to give other opposing defenses real problems, and also make up for the fact that you don't have an elite back end rim, or back of the line rim protector. The Nets don't have that. I know the Nets fans have been wanting this forever, and there's a good case for it, in that sense that they don't have it. We saw in the comment section for YouTube, people continually want guys like Miles Turner to be on the team. They all work constantly pining for centers, right? We want Nick Claxton to be a great sort of rim protector, switching big that can solve some of these problems. But we're seeing that the Nets on this end of the court, I guess what I'm saying is the Nets, I think people think this is a worse problem for the Nets than it actually is. Because when you look at the Nets roster, you say to yourself, where are those guys? Where's the big? Where's the big shot blocking big? They don't have one. The Nets don't really block a ton of shots, not with their bigs at least. They don't block a ton of shots. They don't have that guy. They don't have the Rudy Gobert who's going to pile that up. They don't have like the aforementioned Miles Turner who can really, affect things at the rim. The Nets don't have that prototypical guy, so it's easy to look at the team and say, oh, we need this. We need this guy on the team. But then if you look at the numbers, you start to think, okay, well, even though it doesn't pass the eye test for me, those guys aren't on the team. We need one of these dudes. It ends up not becoming a problem, because what we see in the NBA is that you can scheme away some of those problems if you're solid in terms of like sort of the intelligence piece. You have another sort of different kind of player that begins to affect shots before they begin to happen, a la guys like Bruce Brown and Bembry. You have a guy who's probably really underrated defensively in terms of Kevin Durant, who's just an excellent defender, never gets the kudos on that end because he's so freaking good on offense that it's easy to forget that he's kind of a lockdown defender on the defensive end as well. It's unfair to him, but that ends up being the case because he's just so freaking good on offense. But if you can scheme away some of your deficiencies, then you are able. It's a little easier to get by. Now, when we reach the playoffs and they start to run into real problems where teams can hone in on what exactly they do, will it become problematic then? I think they're going to want to have more versatility come that point. And so if you're going to play this like drop coverage thing, then at some point that will probably come back to haunt you if that's all you can kind of do with Blake Griffin, because other teams will figure out ways to get around it. They'll live more in the mid-range. They'll be able to space a little bit better. They'll know exactly where Griffin's going to land on certain screens. And then at that point, through a 7-game series, that becomes a lot. Like the advantages you get by being good at that diminish against smart teams. Like teams like Miami will figure out how to take that away, right? Like it'll become more of a problem against a team like Philly. We already saw that a team like Milwaukee can kind of solve that problem by just having a guy like Giannis who can undo some of your scheme pretty quickly by being a total freak. So I think the Nets are going to want to have a little more versatility come playoff time with this to make sure that the defense is sound enough to continue, or the defense is sound enough to be able to deal with different scenarios that they just haven't had to deal with right now. And that's what's helped probably boost their defensive efficiency and ranking up a little bit, is that they're not facing some of that stuff yet. And that's okay. This is early in the season. We're figuring it out. We said they spent the first 2 games not even starting Bruce Brown. Again, a mistake by Nash and company, but they're still changing things on the fly. DeAndre Bembry wasn't playing that much, and now he's in on some of the first rotations, and he and Bruce Brown are one of those 2 guys is on the court for 48 minutes because they really, really need him. You figured this stuff out as it goes along, and the Nets are going to continue to need to do that, and maybe when it comes buyout market time, they're able to try to figure out, is there maybe a more versatile wing a la Jeff Green that they can get that will solve some of those other issues later if a guy like Blake Griffin becomes marginalized and they don't really have much of a backup plan beyond him. So again, it's a great start for the Nets in terms of where they are defensively. This is a really, really good building block. And it's I think fun to think about the team as a really good defensive team because look, you're a fan, you watch the game. Sometimes it's easy to just watch a game and say, hey, the ball's going in or it's not. And that's what makes up the whole game. And I get it. That is what makes up the whole game in the end because they tally, points made against, and that's what, comes out in the final box score. But start looking at the Nets a little differently when you watch them right now. Watch them on defense. Watch how good this defense has been. Watch some of the schemes that they're doing to take away other teams' best players. We're not going to see it too much with the Pelicans. The Pelicans stink, but when they actually play, real teams, sorry, Pelicans fans, when they start playing real teams, check out what's happening here because you're going to see that what the Nets are doing on that end of the court is, it's pretty damn good. All right, we got a little bit more to talk about here. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. Thanksgiving right around the corner. All the good food, treats, pies. We're making Thanksgiving plans right now. Adam and I are going to do Thanksgiving together. Got to get the families together for that. We're going to be bringing some Built Bar to the family thing because you're looking at that pie, you're counting up the calories in the pie. I'm not even going to tell you how many. I'll tell you, 300 calories. 300 calories for a slice of pie. That is on the low end. Forget about when you really start loading some of these things up. You've been trying to be good all year. You're trying to stay healthy. You want to also make sure that there's something good to eat at Thanksgiving. Throw a Built Bar in there. Built Bar has all the flavors. I've always joked that they kind of went to the ice cream aisle first, picked out the flavors, and then made it an absolutely awesome protein bar around those flavors first, covered it in chocolate, and that's why these are the best protein bars on the market. Low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein, 100% covered in real chocolate. Great option for when you're hungry. That don't just save it for Thanksgiving. Go have them right now for a snack if you're hungry. You need an energy pickup. Want to make sure you're not overindulging. Built Bar has it for you. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, looking ahead to Friday's game here against the Pelicans, I mentioned before that New Orleans stinks. I don't really know another way to put it. I don't want to be diplomatic about this. They're terrible. I get that part of it has been injury for them with Zion Williamson not being able to play and with the broken foot, and who knows what his timetable is. And Brandon Ingram has sat a ton. I get it. It's like they've had some issues. The team is an absolute utter mess. They're 1-11 right now. They frankly should probably be 0-12. I struggled to watch 3 of their games this year, and it was like watching a team playing in quicksand. I don't really know another way to say it. Their offensive, I can't even call sort of what they do on offense because it's not really that. It's shocking to me that they're not ranked dead last in offensive efficiency. They're 4th to last. So it's funny because they're 4th to last, but the other 3 teams that are behind them are basically starting all rookies and just trying to wait till 3 years from now when they can be good. That's Orlando. They're starting mostly first and second year players, or at most third. Oklahoma City, who is young as basically any team in the league, not trying to win any games at all right now, and they have no real desire to win. And then Detroit, who is kind of in that mode too, where they just kind of, they're bringing along Cade. They have some young pieces that might be interesting later. So New Orleans being grouped, while they're not dead last in offensive efficiency, by where the team probably expected to be compared to where they are. And by the way, Houston's better than them, and Houston also stinks. So the fact that New Orleans is grouped with this group of teams, when that was this is a team that wanted to go to the playoffs this year, right? If Zion's healthy, Brandon Ingram's healthy, this is a team that envisioned themselves as a playoff team. I know by my calculations, and I didn't factor in the Zion injury well enough here because they kind of obfuscated how injured he actually was to start the season. There was no chance he was going to start the season. No one really said that until the season was starting, and then they're like, oh, he doesn't really have a timetable. We're not really sure. I don't know if they did that to sell tickets or to be purposely sort of hide the fact. I don't know. I shouldn't say that because they shouldn't do that. But they clearly weren't totally honest about what his timetable was. Regardless, this was still a team that brought in Jonas Valanciunas in the offseason, brought in Devontae Graham to cure up some of their guard issues. For some reason, let Lonzo go. It's hard to understand why they did that. And they now are just terrible. Like, Ingram hasn't played a bunch of games, so that hurts them. They've really been like way too reliant on Jonas Valanciunas for offensive stuff, and that works to a point, but it's not going to work sort of long term. It's really hard for them to make threes. They don't really have a good point guard at all, and so this is really a team that the Nets should kill. I don't really know another way to put that. The Nets, right now, there's no early line on the game. My guess is the Nets are double-digit favorites on the road in New Orleans. Some of that is probably affected by whether Ingram plays or not. He's been questionable for the last 2 weeks. I don't want to say that, again, that New Orleans sort of plays fast and loose with like where the injury reporting status is, because teams are supposed to be really forthright about that. But I just gave an example of where they weren't when it came to Zion Williamson. So sometimes when I see a guy's been questionable for every game of the last 5 games, which Ingram has been, it might even be more than that, then I start to wonder, is he actually questionable? Is he really close to playing? Is it like, should he have been doubtful for this whole time? Like, what is going on with him? Even if Ingram were to play, he'd probably still be in a ramp-up situation where the minutes wouldn't be all that robust. And even if he plays, like, what are you actually worried about here with this Pelicans team? Like, you worried that Valanciunas takes over some of the inside and is able to sort of dominate a guy like Blake on the interior? Okay, I don't really worry about that much, because yes, that would be a disadvantage for the Nets. The Nets have advantages at every single other position. So this is, again, where Nets fans sometimes want a hand wring around not being able to stop a guy. I would be under the impression, or I would take the opposite view of that and just say, let him just do kind of whatever, and just make sure they don't all their threes are contested, that they're not going to really beat anybody off the dribble at all. Like, when you watch this team, like, that's really not something that's in their bag at all. So I'm just, it's hard to really be all that concerned with this game going in based on like what the Pelicans are as a team. Again, they're one of the very worst teams in all of basketball, without much in the way of seeing how it would get better, right? So like, sometimes when you talk about, how, okay, well, they're here, but they're not hitting these shots, or they're here, but like, it's tough. Look at like some of the superstars. The Trailblazers, and Dame's has struggled to get started during the season, and it's going to get better. Like, you can't say that about the current iteration of the Pelicans that the Nets are going to face on Friday. Yeah, you bring Zion back full health and you bring Brandon Ingram back full health. Okay, yeah, get a different team there. That's not going to be the case for the Nets on Friday. So if we're just looking at what is on the plate for what Brooklyn's going to face here, you would hope that this is another game where Brooklyn can kind of take advantage of another team stumbling and use it as a chance for sort of scheduled rest. No one's going to actually rest the game. Not going to sit out Kevin Durant or James Harden. But a la what happened with the Magic, you would hope the Nets take care of business early and then can really dial down what they, the load that they put on each of those two guys, and some of the older guys as well, in terms of the actual minutes they play. I think as a Nets fan, you'd love to see this game, the Nets get out of this one with 30 or fewer minutes from any of the starters. That means they took care of business early. They were able to really kind of put the hammer down on offense, take care of whatever the Pelicans are running on defense, on offense, which isn't much. Like, deny Jonas point of attack, in the post stuff, and then kind of they don't have anything else to do, right? Like, maybe you worry about them getting out in transition against you with some of the guys like Josh Hart or Nickeil Alexander-Walker or guys like that, but I'm really grasping at straws for what the Pelicans can do against the Nets in terms of just on the offensive end. So I think when we go into this one, we're looking for a situation. Look, I'll put it very simply. We're looking for the Nets to blow these guys out. That's really what the expectation should be. If they can blow out this team, if they can save some of the minutes on the starters, if they can just make sure that no one's being overtaxed, you would hate to have this be a situation where, they really had to run a guys a lot of minutes, even though it's on the road, because this is such a gift from the schedule to get this team on the road as part of the road trip with a guy like Zion out and Ingram hurt. It really is like the scheduling gods, smile down on the Nets with this situation, and the Nets really need to take advantage. So that's what we'll be looking at here. Watch the defense, watch what they do against Valanciunas, watch how they're probably not so worried about that being a thing that the Pelicans have a clear advantage of. I personally am not all that worried about it because there's, again, such clear disadvantages everywhere else on the court. So hopefully we see a double-digit victory from the Nets over the Pelicans here on Friday. We'll be back next week talking, we'll break down this game and then whatever happens over the weekend as well. Maybe get a little post-game thing after the Pelicans one. We'll see how that goes here on Friday. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribing over on YouTube. Every episode is up on the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. Just about to hit 400 subscribers. Probably actually be at 400 by the time you listen to that. So we'll be on our way to 500. Would love to hit 500 before that Thanksgiving holiday. We're trying to, looking to grow that, and every episode and more is up on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. That link will be in the show notes. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.